Hi everyone, thanks for joining us on another live session. Today we are going to be talking about our simulation tool. We've been receiving a lot of frequently asked questions, so we thought the best way to answer them would be to hold another one of these. So before we get started into the nitty-gritty, Angie, what is the simulation tool?
Simulation helps with doing visitorship, membership, and revenue projections when you're doing scenario planning. And that's really useful, particularly right now with COVID-19, because who knows what the future is going to look like once everybody reopens for those that haven't already. So it allows you to think forward and imagine, what is it going to look like with no tourism? What if we don't get school groups coming through? What if our older visitors don't come back for a while? And even once you're reopened, it's a really useful tool for projecting how those things might change dramatically in the future. This is a situation that's moving really fluidly. There is no playbook for it. Nobody has the ability to see exactly how the future is going to unfold. So it helps us to prepare those best and worst case scenarios.
And I know that there is an interesting story as to how simulation came about. Could you tell us what that story is?
It's funny, just before COVID-19 broke, we have at Dexivit, we do big data analytics for visitor attractions, and as part of that we do forecasting, and we predict what visitation and revenue and other things how those things might unfold. And we were working with Dinah Pan up at MoMA, and Dinah was challenging us to be able to toggle parts of our forecasting model on and off. And we were sort of wondering why you might want to do that and how it would be useful and how you'd apply it. And lo and behold, here comes this massive situation where that is suddenly really important. Like, what if we don't do this event or this exhibition, or what if we don't have this group of audiences, or what if there are no cruise ships? And so that question was answered fairly quickly for us.
Very quickly.
We were doing these impact assessment reports when COVID started to help understand, how many visitors people had lost while things were slowing down, and to say, okay, well, if you're going to be closed for a month or 2 months or 3 months even, this is what that closure will do in terms of damage to visitors and revenue. And I think that there was sort of the early days of the simulator was starting to think forward about what that future might look like. And a couple of weeks later, we had the concept for a product. It was the fastest thing we've ever taken to market. An absolute joy to be a part of just such an exciting project. I think we had our beta version up in about 10 days. And thank you to everybody who has helped us develop that with your ideas and your feedback. It's been incredible.
Yeah, it moves so quickly, and I know that the team have really loved working on this project, which is awesome. And there's a lot of complex technology that goes behind how the simulation works, and everything that goes behind toggling all the tools. How does scenario simulation work?
So it's a hybrid approach of both machine learning and manual control. And I think that's kind of when AI is at its best, when it is a hybrid of person and machine. So how it works is it takes at least 12 months of daily visitation. You can submit more if you like, and it is better with more. And with that historic visitation, it trains up a machine learning model based on the patterns and trends of your venue as it was pre-COVID for business as usual times, and it then projects forward what would have happened without COVID. And that's kind of our starting point for simulation. And from there, we start to use manual controls to say, okay, well, let's say I'm going to close on Mondays. Let's say I'm closed up until July 20th. Let's say typically I get 36% of my visitors from international tourism, and I'm expecting that to deplete by at least 50%. So it sort of applies all of those factors on top. Some of those factors can be applied using machine learning. Some of those factors are applied as sort of scaling factors. So it's a really smart mix of machine and control.
And you touched very briefly on the assumptions that people can make within the tool. What others can they use to put their scenarios to put their scenarios together?
So shutdowns, initial closure and reopening, rolling closure, which is a really important one people often forget, but a really big risk at the moment that we will see rolling closures in like September and January perhaps, is I think the most common thing people are planning for from what I've seen. We are already seeing a bit of rolling closure. One happened in Hong Kong quite early on. South Korea have had one affecting their cultural institutions at the moment. So it's a real risk of operating in a COVID world. Tourism, so international tourism, domestic tourism, and breaking that down into regions or things like drive-in audiences versus fly-in audiences. You can add capacity limits. You can change your opening hours and days. My memory's running out at this point. There's a great custom segments assumption where you can add pretty much anything that you like. So if you want to say, look at my over 65 demographic or my school groups or my families or look at how visitors are inspired or whatever the case might be. And then, of course, membership and revenue assumptions on top.
And the demand curve as well.
Oh, yes, the demand curve is brilliant. So you can choose to model like pent-up demand or slow growth demand, and you can change the controls of how that's applied. A hot tip, every venue that's opened, slow growth.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
It's a little bit sad. And with those more complex assumptions, for example, tourism, how does something like that work?
So the way that it works is that it asks you for what your normal situation is. So say, for example, tourism, you look at your international tourism, it'll say like, what are your regions that you normally see tourists from and what percentages do you get normally that split from? And then it asks you for your suppression factor that you want to model for the scenario. So do you want it to say, what if it was down to 10%, or what if it's down to 0 for some regions, or you can sort of split things up over time and apply different factors over different time scales. So that's how it applies. And you can choose either to use our regions or you can use your own regions. And if you don't know where your visitors come from, some venues don't collect enough data at the moment to be able to tell that. We do supply some sort of standard ways based off sort of common tourist statistics for your region. So the starting point that you're provided with is a sort of base split for that.
And when we released Scenario Simulation, we said that it is going to be free to visitor attractions during COVID-19. Why is Scenario Simulation free?
Well, I mean, the visitor attraction sector is facing a crisis, and one that challenges its very existence. And our business relies on a thriving visitor attraction sector. So we really see it as our job to do anything and everything we can to support the industry through this and lead it back into growth. And some of that has been our Leading in Crisis series, things like Reopen Run, which has been so fun to do. But some of it is to do what we can do in the product world as well. So we thought we'd release a free version of the simulator. So it's a starter piece of functionality, just so that everybody's got the ability to be able to model what their future is going to look like.
And when people provide their data to us to run those simulations, how accurate is that forecast and how does it make a prediction? I know you touched on it earlier.
Yeah, so when you use a machine learning model to predict what the future is going to look like, it gives you actually a fit or an accuracy. And we measure that on a bronze, silver, gold standard. So for us, bronze is like 70% accurate. Silver is 80% accurate, gold is 90% plus. So sort of those 70 to 80, 80 to 90, 90 to 100 bands. And that's important because when you're then trusting those numbers later on, you kind of want to know what your contingency factor should be. You know, if you've got a silver graded simulation, you want to say, okay, so this is plus or minus 20% when you're thinking about your numbers. Typically, things like art museums are a lot more predictable than things like science museums. So how predictable your data will contribute to how accurate that base forecast is, but also the amount of data that you provide us, which is why it's good to provide more than 12 months if you can, because years of data help to identify some of those deeper trends. In terms of what goes into that, for our free users, we use the time series trends that it picks up in your data. So like, what does a Monday look like? What does September look like? Are things going up or down to begin with? We use also public holidays. We have our own records of that, and school holidays or school terms for your region. For our normal paid customers, we have a really complex calendar, what we call an almanac of contextually enriched information of what's happening in and around the venue. And that makes their forecasts way more accurate, because at that point we forecast using all sorts of things like what exhibitions are on, was there a sports event nearby to the venue, what is the weather doing for next week, is it going to be humid or raining, and what does it look like at 6 a.m. versus 10 a.m. and all of these sorts of things. So that's how we get higher accuracy grades for those customers.
And we get a lot of questions about data and privacy and security, which is very important to us here at Dexhibit. Could you tell us a little bit more about how that works?
Sure. So we are fairly strict on privacy. We don't take in any personally identifiable information about visitors, full stop. And so the data that we're asking for to be able to do a simulation is 12 months of daily visitation. It's a statistic rather than a personally identifiable piece, but that is the same for all analytics that we do. We're big believers that you don't need to know who a visitor is to make a good business decision about how to serve them. And so all of the data that we take in other parts of the product is all non-identifiable. And we treat it in aggregate anonymously. When it comes to security, we work with AWS. Our servers are based out of Oregon. We conform with all of their standards. We have a really tight security requirement. We work with a lot of governments, US, UK, New Zealand, Australia, so conform to all of their standards. We get audited by third parties, so we take that very, very seriously in terms of our security protection.
And can people download their data if they wish?
Yeah, really easy. In the front of the product there is a button, and you can download all the data you've given us and all of the simulation data that we've given you.
Too easy. So as people make their scenarios, how many should they make? Because you can make as many as you want.
Yeah.
As when you're first starting on the product, or when you're first starting with the tool, we do recommend that you make a certain amount of scenarios to begin with.
So we suggest 3, and most people do start with 3. I think it's really easy when you get into scenario planning to have a plan in mind. And the problem with that at the moment is that the future is very unpredictable. So it's better to have a range of possible futures in mind. So we suggest doing a best case scenario, a worst case scenario, and a most probable scenario. So what that might look like is like a best case scenario, you open quite soon, you stay open, you maybe see pent-up demand, if you want to be bold. Very optimistic. And you see a fairly quick return to business as usual levels. A worst case scenario would be, unfortunately, you don't open as soon as you would like to. You experience rolling closures, multiple ones. Tourism is off the table. Demand is slow to grow back. Everything is quite suppressed. So, those are a range of futures to plan for. And what that allows you to do is, when you do reopen, you can check which scenario you are tracking closest to, and you can have a range of plans and actions that you've had time to think about, rather than open the door, it's not going to plan, panic. So you can sort of open the door, say, okay, we're tracking to scenario B, and go forward. A lot of people choose to save more than 3 scenarios. So quite often they will update their scenarios and version control them every week. They will break scenarios down into, say, quarters or months. so that they can sort of show gradual change over time. So all of those are great approaches.
Allowing people to make iterations of the different scenarios they want. And when it comes to who uses scenario simulation, who is it for?
We've seen a variety of people using it. We designed it originally for finance teams, but it's been equally used by visitor services and operations, by marketing departments, by digital departments. So it really depends who's sort of leading the charge on data decision making in your organization. Most venues, I think, at this point have a crisis management team that are meeting usually on a weekly basis. So usually somebody who's sitting on that team will take up the charge to be able to bring scenario planning to the table and sort of keep that up to date every so often.
And how are people using it, and what kind of decisions are they making because of the simulation tool?
Yeah, so that is typically how we're seeing people use it, is they've got this crisis management team, they're meeting once a week, and they start to put some numbers on the table of what those scenarios are going to look like. They keep an eye on what's happening in the world. Are borders reopening? What's the regulations around things like capacity? What are they seeing in venues that are reopened? And we've done a great series there to help with that. And then they're feeding that knowledge into their simulations and bringing new numbers back for that scenario planning. And it's been really interesting hearing about all of the decisions that happen as a result of that. A really classic one, which I've heard many times already, is a lot of people hadn't considered this risk of rolling closures. And the problem with rolling closures is they make it so hard to plan your hiring schedule. Because if you have gone through furlough or something similar with your staffing for that initial close down, and you're getting ready to rehire, retrain up to a full workforce, and then you encounter another rolling closure, especially if it happens in like 3 months' time, we're expecting or that there is a risk of a rolling closure in the fall, and another one, so maybe about September, and then another one just after winter, so maybe January, February time. And that would be really devastating if everybody had to shut down for another month. So what that is doing is, as the risk, monitoring the risk of that occurring and being able to see the effect of that in the visitation numbers, means that people can plan a workforce that's going to be able to withstand that, rather than a bumpy workforce of sort of, hiring and then furloughing and hiring and then furloughing, which is really hard on the organisation and hard on the people involved too.
We have a base version of the simulator, which is free and will be free during COVID-19, but we do have a paid version of the simulator, which is a more advanced version of the product, and some other paid plans as well. How much are those upgrades?
Sure. So we really wanted to make some pricing that was really accessible during this time in particular. And so our free simulation plan, you've got 3 users, you can simulate visitation, and you can use the full range of assumptions there. There's no limits on the amount of data you send us or anything like that. The upgrades that we've got, Simulator Plus for $299 a month per venue, you can get up to 10 users, and that will also allow you to simulate membership and revenue as well. Plus it gives you these really cool contribution analysis, and you can compare multiple scenarios, so there's some more visualizations in there as well. Beyond that, we've got a couple of plans that give you more than simulation. So we have a plan called Exhibit Classic, which is $499 a month per venue, and that will give you dashboards, and you can integrate in things like Google Analytics and your social media, as well as your upload your visitation data. And then Exhibit Premium is scaled by the size of your visitation annually. So we generally suggest it's a good product if you have at least 100,000 visitors a year. Some of our clients have up to 10 million plus, and we just scale that pricing to suit the size of your organization. And that way there's no limits on integrations. You can integrate as many systems as you like. You can put as much data as you want in there. You can add as many users as you like. So it's a a real sort of all-you-can-eat license.
And there are a lot of updates that are coming up for Simulator, especially. It's something that we're continuing to build on and improve. What's coming up next for it?
I'm really excited about our next release for Simulator. We've been releasing new features in every week. And the next one is a reopening release. So we've got lots of venues that have started reopening already. And we wanted to provide a way to give you a quick impact assessment on how that reopening is going. How much are you down year on year? What is your growth trajectory? How does that potentially compare to other people who are reopening as well? And so we've got some great visualizations to do a COVID impact assessment, so you can upload your reopening data.
And as people are building their scenarios and they're transitioning from planning and using the simulations to planning what business as usual looks like using the forecasts, what is our advice on that?
Yeah, so for Dexibit Premium customers who use our machine learning models for forecasting, our team are working as fast as they can to get those models to react to a post-COVID world. Typically, machine learning uses historic data to make changes and predictions about the future. And so when that future is so uncertain, it takes a little while for those models to catch up. We are leveraging our experience from places like New Zealand and Australia that are reopening to be able to inform that work. So what we're expecting is that after you've been open for a few weeks, we'll be able to start making informed decisions about the future using our usual forecasting, but keeping that scenario in parallel as you reopen. Because even once you are reopened, that we're expecting that growth trajectory won't be linear. It's going to be a pretty bumpy ride. And so continuing to use scenario planning will mean that you can continue to keep looking at different best and worst case scenarios to plan for the future.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Angie.
Thank you.
We have a tutorial this coming Thursday at 4 p.m. EST with Pip Gilbert, who was our VP product. In case you would like to see simulation in action, we will be showing off some of the features and how to create scenarios, and also some examples of how other institutions, other organizations are creating their scenarios and putting them into action. So please join us. We have the link to that on our website, www.dexibit.com, and we will see you there. Thank you so much for joining us today.
See you again soon.